Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Jacobs. My partner is Rowena Drake, and our article is The Experience of the Jewish Family in the Nazi Ghetto, Kovno, a Case Study. The Nazi Invasion and Ghettoization. On June 24th, 1941, the German army invaded Kovno, Lithuania. They went through Kovno and ordered all the Jews to give up their apartments, their belongings, and move into a Nazi created ghetto in the neighborhood of Sladovka. Within the ghetto, conditions were awful. It was overcrowded. There was disease, hunger, and deportation to death camps. And these conditions constantly challenged survival. There was also a prohibition of pregnancy in the Nazi ghetto. And in May of 1942, an edict was passed by the Nazis that required all pregnancies to be terminated. The edict kept getting more and more severe and eventually turned into all pregnant women will be killed on the spot if seen. So, as a result of that edict, the rabbi in the Kovno ghetto ruled that because of the danger to their lives, Jewish women could, in fact, use contraceptives before intercourse. Aktienen and Kinderaktienen. Aktienen means selection in German, and this was what would happen when people came to the ghetto. The Gestapo agents would decide if individuals were useless or useful, and they would basically always determine children, single women, elderly, sick, overweight people as useless, and they would send them to death camps. Um, and then some parents would actually be determined useful, but they would insist on following their kids to death camps. Other times, sometimes Nazis would say, "Okay, you would be useful, but you can go with your child." So either way, a lot of parents were leaving with their children, child or children. Due to this, sometimes older siblings who were old enough to be considered useful were left, alone in the ghetto to care for each other, while watching their parents being sent away or choosing to leave with their younger siblings. In autumn of 1943, Kovno was turned into a concentration camp, and Kinderaktian was constantly happening here. Pre-concentration camp Kovno, they would deport the children. They would just go through, and when Kinderaktian took place, go through all the homes and take all the children out, and infants and old people, elderly people. And once it was turned into a concentration camp, they kept them there in Kovno in the ghetto and would just murder them there. The most brutal Kinderaktian was March 27th through 28th, 1944. 1,800 people, kids, infants, elderly people, were dragged out of their homes, taken into the middle of the square in the ghetto, and murdered. The surviving orphans of Kinderakten in the Nazi ghetto were forced to become adults overnight in order to survive. They got jobs, they started providing for themselves. They also took it upon themselves to stop showing any sort of emotion because emotion was perceived as weak by the Nazis. So they would just really, they became these tough little beings that were trying to prove that they were useful for survival. And this image is of the Kovno ghetto when the Gestapo agents are there deciding who is useful and who is useless. So, reactions to the stress of the ghetto, role changing in the family was a huge effect of war crises. Women and children took on the traditional male roles left vacant by the men that were deported or left their families separated from their families. Also, a lot of parents couldn't really handle the stressors of the ghetto and would break down and not be able to really function. So the children had to take on an authoritative role when that happened, which was pretty frequently. Due to that, the kids, didn't really see their parents as authoritarians anymore. The kids were held their own jobs, were providing for their families, were procuring food, and also many of the children in the Kovno ghetto and all Nazi ghettos were involved in smuggling food into the ghetto. They would sneak out, get the food, bring it back in, which was considered a real lifeline of the ghetto because the people couldn't survive just on the rations alone. And that's actually where the term breadwinners came from, were those food smugglers. During this time, families really either bonded together in greater solidarity, or they just deteriorated. A lot of parents as well, due to the stress, would start abusing their children, abusing their spouses when this kind of behavior had never happened before the war. So that broke down a lot of families as well. People didn't know how to handle that. Also, many men in the Kovno ghetto with families, suddenly decided that they needed younger girls for their sexual needs and would just kind of go off, abandon their families, and, you know, fulfill whatever desires they wanted to because they kind of had the attitude like, oh, we'll probably be dead tomorrow, so let's just live in the moment, and kind of just abandon their values, abandon their morals, and turned into these completely different people. So that obviously had a really negative effect on families as well. And this slide, this picture shows two boys in the Kovno ghetto just working in the wood shop. So, support systems. The ghetto actually did something really positive. It reunited extended families that had been previously separated or just not very close. There was really a big strength in numbers type of attitude in the ghetto. So, the extended family would kind of band together and try to live together in the same apartments or adjoining apartments, and also provided a lot of emotional support to each other, not only safety and support just by being a big group, but if someone was having a hard time or was in a worse spot than they were, they would give up their own living space for that person. It became a big emotional support for everyone. Women would also marry men for survival because single women were useless and would have been deported or murdered there if they were not married. So men were stepping up and marrying these women to keep them alive. These marriages not only provided safety and survival, but also ended up providing emotional support and security and occasionally love. And these marriages also started creating these surrogate families. And again, it was the strength in numbers. People wanted to be a part of a family system. And it also made people feel like they had purpose again, to be a part of something, be a part of a marriage. And that was really important. I think the strongest proof in the ghettos, though, that people really needed to maintain a family unit was the adoption of the orphans, because the adults would see these orphans running around and, know how vulnerable they were and would take them in and, protect them. The adoptions saved these children's lives, and not only saved their lives, but provided them with this loving and caring environment, which they hadn't had for a long time. And for the adults, it was a benefit because again, you're adding people, you're adding your numbers, you're adding people to your family, to your support system. This image is a woman who has just given birth to a baby in the Kovno ghetto. It's hard to see, it's black and white, but if you look closely, there is a Jewish star on that baby's blanket, which sadly means that that baby is marked to be deported or murdered, depending on when this was taken. Um, Probably just a few minutes after this picture was taken. So that's really sad. Important findings. The sense of community and close relationships grew stronger when all privacy was stripped and overcrowding of the ghettos began. I think that's interesting because, physically, people were being forced to live a lot closer to each other. And because of that physical closeness, stronger relationships emerged and stronger support systems emerged because of it. People were also willing to risk their life to keep some sense of normalcy and fulfill basic human wants such as intimacy, love, and religion. The Jewish people never stopped being Jewish. They practiced Judaism in the ghettos. Um, they chose to have sex, even if sex could possibly lead to pregnancy, which could lead to death. Um, so it shows how important those basic human things are to people, that even in this kind of situation of crisis, people will still seek those out and practice them and, keep them in their lives. The role of an individual evolved while time was spent in the ghetto. Uh, Pre-war, there were very traditional roles in the family, and then post-war and during the war, children had to step up and take on the role of parents. Women had to step up and take on the role of men. So, societal roles were really shifted after the war and during the war. Uh, and kids had to raise their themselves and their siblings and even their grandparents sometimes and parents. Life devolved from living to surviving, yet, even in survival mode, people fought to maintain a family system. I think not even fought to maintain it, but made it the number one priority. I think people went above and beyond everything else. It was the most important thing for them to be a part of a family system, however they come by it. Again, because family did equal survival in these ghettos. So, for further study, in many cases, the Jewish community knew that the Germans were hunting them down, but they would still rather risk their own life to keep a sense of normalcy rather than flee and survive. There was actually a quote in the article. A man, his response to the Kovno Ghetto was, "I built a house, I have a family, all of this to leave and run. Why?" I mean, it shows that he probably could have fled when he knew that the Germans were invading and possibly not have been put in the ghetto, but chose to stay because that was his normal. Like, that was his world. Why would he leave it? Um, and then the prohibition of pregnancy. What could drive an individual to want to have sexual intercourse, to risk getting pregnant and risk being executed because of it? Especially when the rabbi even said in Kovno, it's okay to use contraception, you know, it won't go against our religious beliefs during this time. And then this is really interesting. A couple could not conceive for 12 years, but they conceived in the ghetto while a mandatory abortion was in place. They decided to go through with the pregnancy, deliver the baby, and then only to be found by the Nazis, of course, and have their child taken from them. They were interviewed in this article, and they said that the reason why they chose to go through with the pregnancy and the birth was because it was going to be the only source of joy that they had while they were in the ghetto. And you think about it, it's a kind of a rite of passage in, humans' lives to have babies, to be pregnant if you're a woman, and it's a normal thing. And so I thought it was really interesting that they chose to go through with all that to experience that, even though they knew the outcome probably wasn't going to be positive. So that was our presentation. Thank you so much, for watching. And here's our reference page. And we look forward to reading your comments in the forum. Thanks, guys.